Hoodoo plants, mamas, get your soul fed and your spirit read.
This here ain't no trend. I possess the power from way back when. Back when folk were stripped from all of their kin, so they had to find the magic within. Ancestors to gather my herbs, I conjure at my altar. Voodoo plant mama, I manifest growth and I release trauma.
Child, we just out here trying to water our plants and mind our business, you know? Everybody ain't from the deep south, man. Everybody can't have culture like us.
Hey y'all, and welcome back to another episode of Hoodoo Plant Mamas. I am your co-host Leah Nicole.
And I'm Dani B.
And Dani V, how are you doing today?
Doing okay. I'm feeling good. I got a chance to get outside yesterday. So I feel like the trees really energized me. I got a nice little forest bath. What about you?
I've been doing good. For April, I decided to get off social media, and it's been doing good for me. Like creatively, I've been able to revise the manuscript I'm working on. I also, because it's National Poetry Month, I was like, you know what? Let me put together a chapbook. So I put together a poetry chapbook of like some of my favorite poems over the past decade. We'll see if it comes out. But yeah, I just have been having a pretty solid month. So anyway, let's get into some gratitude. Dani, what are you grateful for today?
I am grateful for the trees. And I'm grateful for when the trees call me in unexpected ways. So, yeah, I'm just thankful for the power and magnificence of trees. What are you thankful for today?
I spent this weekend with friends. So like pretty much every weekend we've been in Mississippi. We've been busy because everyone's like, we want to see you. But this weekend I spent with friends. We were like laughing and talking over good food. And I was just like, I really needed that. I felt really full, both physically full and emotionally full. So I'm grateful for that.
I felt that because I be feeling so full when I spend time with my friends. All right, well, let's get into the show. Today, I want to start off with a question for all of us. Are you speaking for God or are you speaking from insecurity? This question came to me because the other day, a hoodoo I followed named JDK Story shared a post from this person I know of as a Christian rapper saying, when you say I manifested it, you're robbing God of his glory. And then he goes on to say something about manifestation is the idea that you can bring a positive outcome into your life by claiming it, and that somehow that dishonors God or takes glory away from God. And I really loved what Jada said in response, which was, I'm so glad that I know now that God is not intimidated by my divinity. Whatever I manifest is inherently a reflection of the God above, the God within, and the God around me. And she really hit the nail on the head to like exactly what I felt. Because when I read that original post, I immediately felt exasperated. I was just like, oh, here we go. It got me thinking a lot about how folks are dead set on speaking for God when they are really speaking from a place of uncertainty around the God in themselves. If you believe we're in the image of God, we're made up of the Spirit of God, how then does claiming the blessing bestowed upon you by God or any divine power is somehow robbing God of God's glory? And I think that's what upsets me the most because people really aren't seeking a connection to God. They're seeking affirmation in a particular performance. And I have another example of this that I ironically saw on YouTube not too long after seeing that post by that gospel rapper. But Leah, what are your thoughts on that particular like idea around manifestation?
I love your last point about people are seeking affirmation in a particular performance. And I think it not only does speak to religion and spirituality, but I also think it speaks to our broader society as well. Like, success is often about looking successful. It doesn't matter if you are, it matters if you look that way. So it's like being woke, quote unquote. It's about performing wokeness. The opposite is also true. I think about Ron DeSantis, who it's like his tirade against Disney, even though he is a Disney adult. But often people don't care about how things actually are. They care about what they look like. Like, they don't care about being in right relation with the divine, with other people, with animals, with the land. They care about looking like they are. And that was often a problem for me when I was in the church. I was often criticized for not having the right outward appearance of a devout follower. When in reality, I was doing the work. I was reading my Bible, I was praying, I was doing all of these things behind closed doors, but I wasn't doing them out in the open because it was very uncomfortable for me. And I think people took that as a sign of like, I didn't care because I wasn't performing. But with all that aside, I think people are really afraid to acknowledge that they are divine. Like, we think, what gives us the right to see ourselves in that way? And I think a lot about the church and often why it's one of the few institutions that Black people are, in many ways, allowed to have today. And I think it's because it actively discourages us from seeing ourselves as divine. Like, the rare instances I've been in a church that talks about us as being divine beings, like God, it's been churches that have been led by women. Even those were seen as too radical, quote unquote, or sometimes men would say they were backwards because women should not be in like speaking roles. My childhood pastor often said that women can be evangelicals, they can never be pastors. But my great aunt is a reverend doctor. So my family personally does not believe those things, but I grew up in a church that did. But the church, I think it taught me specifically, and I think it teaches a lot of us to lean onto God for everything, like to be submissive, to be obedient, to be subservient, that if we're good, if we pray the right prayer, God will deliver us. But it rarely encourages us to go out there and seek the things that we want. Like, I constantly heard faith without works is dead. And I still take that to heart. Like, if you want something, you may have to wait, you may have to be patient, but you can't always just sit around and wait for it. You can't be waiting and praying. Like, sometimes you need to get up, you need to go outside, and you need to go do something. And the work is requiring you to act as well. And so I think when we see God as all powerful, we see ourselves as being powerless. And I really want to push back against that because you have power too, and you need to act like it.
Period. Like, I love that you mentioned faith without works is dead because people love quoting that. And I look at manifestation as not just you pulled it out of thin air. Manifestation is like you're working, you're working towards something. When you're claiming these things, you are also moving in a way that makes space for these things to come into your life. And I also see it as a sort of like collaboration with God that's connected to that faith. I think this goes in line with like what I'm trying to get at, like what you said. When I pose this question of are you speaking for God or are you speaking from insecurity? I see insecurity when I see people who spend more time trying to label things as evil or ungodly or demonic. And this like very not so subtle policing of people's spirituality, of how people exist in the world, even Christians policing other Christians. I'm thinking, when do you have time to nurture your relationship with not only God, but yourself? And I wonder about that when it becomes an obsession for some religious people to hyper focus on what's wrong rather than what's good. If you want to talk about the power of God and God's glory, God don't need your saving or protection. Like, God is, regardless of what people say or do on God's behalf or what people say or do against God. Like, God is. And God don't need you jumping out front with a cape because God got it. But to my point about like another example of this like insecurity, I saw a YouTube video and apparently there's a bunch, and I wasn't finna go down that rabbit hole. Like it's stressful, but there's a video and apparently several videos of people denouncing sororities, particularly Black sororities. And this one video was labeled, I essentially made a pledge to Satan or to the devil. And people were in the comments affirming it or insinuating that the process is demonic and how God sent them signs telling them that it was a bad idea. And as someone who never had an interest in sororities because I found them to be elitist, and that's no shade to anybody that's in them, I personally couldn't afford to buy my way into those groups. To each his own, but I still think it's silly to like automatically connect your displeasure with something as demonic. And listen, I grew up Christian. I ain't just talking shit. I'm talking from experience. And as somebody who done lived through this, and I still have people in my family like this. Sometimes it ain't the devil. Sometimes it's the people. Sometimes it's the systems you see replicated in these orgs that is the problem. And I think it's easier for folks to make it about God and this make believe war God has with the red faced devil than interrogating the world we live in and how that impacts the communities we're a part of. And again, that's where the insecurity comes in, because have you ever thought about it? Perhaps it's your divine intuition that this is not a good space for you, that this org is not living up to the standards that they've set for themselves, then maybe the energy that you're getting from the people being drawn to this org is that they're really not about community. Intuitively knowing something is not intuitively knowing something is not for you shouldn't always turn into God told me this was demonic. God ain't told you nothing. I just think you don't trust yourself. Like, I think that's the core. Like, people don't trust themselves. People take the gift of intuition that the energy in this space is not doing what it needs to be doing. And so I need to remove myself. And instead, you want to just make a blanket statement and connect it back to God. And God is sitting here floating around us. God is all around us, confused. How did I get in it? Like, you know what I mean?
I really like your point about like people tie their displeasure with being demonic. And I think on the flip side, people also tie like anything that they like too much as being demonic. It's I don't know. I feel like people only see themselves as being God when it comes to judgment, when it comes to judging something else, but rarely for anything else. But I'm glad you brought up the whole like God told me thing, because I've been thinking a lot about how, and this is more for like white evangelical, but like manifest destiny and this belief that God told them this country was theirs and it was their right to claim this land. But like if it was a person of color that did that, that was like, my God told me to do this, all of a sudden it's savage, it's uncivilized, it's demonic. And this was something that I saw spring up recently with Mystic X Lipstick. That was her at, I believe, whose real name was Danielle Johnson. She committed an alleged murder suicide of herself, her partner, and her infant. She was an astrologer who died on April 8th of this year. And there was so much commentary around how this was proof that African spirituality, I don't think she was part of African spirituality. I know she was an astrologer, but this was proof that any sort of spiritual tradition that is not Christianity is demonic. And again, like it does not look at the similarities between other forms of spirituality and Christianity, because Christianity is a type of spirituality. You are trying to connect to the divine in one way. The divine tends to be the Holy Trinity, God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit or Ghost, depends on what denomination you're a part of. But it is a spirituality. People don't view it that way. And so there are similarities between Christianity and a lot of other major faith traditions. But no one looks at those similarities. They just look at, oh, if something bad happens over here, it's because this whole thing is demonic. But if something bad happens in Christianity, it's a one-off, kind of like the lone wolf mass shooter that just keeps happening and keeps looking a certain way. But if it happens to somebody else, it's a sign that those people are bad
Child,
terrorists.
let a they, them, or somebody, or they discover somebody that had pronouns in their bio committed a mass shooting. The last time a white person, it was a white person this time because it's usually a white person. They found out him in his LinkedIn bio. Child, they ran with it. When are we gonna start talking about the violence happening with these pronoun warriors? For every person with pronouns in their bio that commits a mass shooting, there's like 1,000. It's 1,000 to 1. It's 1,000 to 1. Like, relax. But anyway, go ahead.
They do. They use that as proof. And it's just like you are not even interrogating like your own tradition. You just blanketly see it is right and everything else is wrong. And I don't think that's a healthy way to view spirituality. And I think when it comes to like Danielle, like reading about her last days, she did not seem like she was in a good place mentally. I think that that was more of a indication of like lack of mental, emotional, and community support instead of it being some demonic factors or because of her spiritual traditions. And I do want to point out like there were some people who speculated she could be in psychosis, and psychosis can happen to any of us. Like you are not special, you're not exempt. And she just had a baby, and psychosis can be a postpartum symptom, which is something that is important to keep in mind in a country that wants to force people to give birth.
Heavy on the psychosis can happen to anybody, to any of us, because I think a lot of people think it could never be them. And we literally live under prime conditions for you to break from reality. Like some of God's strongest soldiers can lose their mind because everything in this world that we're witnessing, it don't make sense. We see it don't make sense, and they trying to convince us that it makes sense. That would drive anybody over the edge. I also think, to your point about them trying to make it into a thing, because they think there are people that think astrology is demonic, and like I'm gonna give them this. I could see you thinking like spirituality and all of that, like African spiritual traditions are demonic because, like, of course you do. Of course you think that's demonic. I am a little confused about trying to make astrology demonic because what astrology do but read us through the stars and planets? Like, no, that like are the planets demonic anyway? People who are trying to use astrology or anything that's not Christianity to like make it use a tragedy to sort of make it into this is why it's wrong. They're being ahistorical. Like, y'all not watching and reading enough about cults. Some of this country's most notorious cults, honestly, majority of the ones that got documentaries are Christian based. Like, they're Christian organizations. Oftentimes their spiritual leaders, it gets up into a point, even people who quite frankly, some of them do start off with good intentions. You can see when things begin to escalate that the spiritual leader is clearly exhibiting signs of psychosis. Like, it's blatant. And we often talk about the victims of cults and how they're affected psychologically, which is important. I also think people don't think a lot about the leaders and those who reach certain positions of power in these cults and how they also become victims of that power in the way that they become like deified in these organizations. I think it affects their brain and their sense of reality. And I think social media plays a role in like this cult like behavior, these toxic parasocial relationships, and the ways that like people position folks and like what that does to folks mentally. Because like you had mentioned with Danielle, she had a huge following, and quite frankly, she ain't the only spiritualist, the only astrologer who be saying some questionable shit and has hundreds of thousands of people following them. That is dangerous. It's dangerous, and it's no different from what we have seen with cults historically and what is happening not only to the victims but to the leaders. Like I think there are two things happening psychologically, and I think we don't spend enough time on what's psychologically happening when you achieve a certain level of power. I just think we not meant to have there's not meant to be one person over thousands or hundreds of people. Like it's not, it's a recipe for disaster.
I definitely agree. And I don't know what it is about digital that makes it seem different. Like someone has trying to be put things into perspective. Like even with this podcast, I was feeling kind of down looking at the numbers cuz our most popular episode has thousands of downloads. Recently most of our episodes are getting 500. And so when you put that into perspective, we are basically talking to an audience full of people, like an auditorium full of people who listen to us every 2 weeks. That's a lot of people. And I think social media has made it think like, oh, if you don't have 10,000 followers, if you don't have 15,000, if you don't have 20,000, what you're doing is not important. And I think that people really do underestimate the responsibility that comes with having that many people listen to you. And like you said, I think it can be overwhelming to have that many people constantly check in, constantly ask for your opinion, constantly try to ask for advice and figure out their lives while you're trying to figure out your own. I think that that can be incredibly overwhelming for them.
For sure. And I also noticed the drop in our numbers. I think it's because we took such a long hiatus. But also, what I like about us, I know this is about to be a tangent, but I think the people who are meant to find us find us. And I kind of like the intimacy of it because the other thing that happens once you start getting into, I would say, the tens and hundreds of thousands of people, that's when shit started getting a little shaky because now you got people projecting all these things on you and holding you to like very unrealistic standards. And it's a lot of pressure. And as somebody who I am a podcaster who listens to podcasts, no shade to people, but you know, I listen to them not just because they entertain me, but I also learn from them. But I see it. I've watched it happen with podcasts that I've listened to for years, and just like the stress that comes with it, the fact that they have to get on their show and be like, y'all need to stop harassing us while we're on vacation. Like we said we will be back. We be here like 355 days out of the year and we want to take a week off and y'all are tripping. Like that is that parasocial weird dynamic. But yeah. Did you have any other final thoughts or did you want to take a break?
We can take a break.
Let's get into some ways you can support the Hoodoo Plant Mamas podcast. One way is through our bookshop where you can buy the books that we've discussed on the show. We have a Hoodoo Beginner's Guide. Leah and I also share our top reading picks. And we have the books we discussed with our Writing the Spirit guests. Every purchase you make helps support our show. Check us out at bookshop.org/shop/Hoodoo Plant Mamas or at the link in our show notes. Other ways you can support us include rating and reviewing this podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Hoodoo Plants and Instagram at Hoodoo Plant Mamas.
Check out our Patreon where we share exclusive video, plant, and spiritual content for only $3 a month. We have a new patron, Rashonda. Thank you for joining us. If you prefer a one-time donation, you can donate via Cashapp, #, Hoodoo Plant Mamas, or our PayPal, hoodooplantmamas@gmail.com. Let's get back to the show.
All right, y'all. So, kind of going along with that original question we started with, my next question that sort of followed up this question as I was reflecting is your spirituality rooted in a genuine desire to connect to the divine, or is it rooted in a sense of superiority over other religions and spiritual traditions? This is a question I think we all need to ask ourselves periodically because I was talking about spirituality with my friend who's also spiritual, and they said they're sometimes reluctant to connect with certain spiritual people because either all the person wants to do is talk about spirituality or make everything about spirituality, or they end up being like super performative and judgmental. And I think the big one is the sort of performance, judgmental, superiority complex. As you've discussed, Leah, and I can relate to it, is that I had some resentment towards Christianity for a while, even as I was sort of transitioning into a more African based practice. I think it's fair given the ways Christianity has been weaponized and still is against women, against queer and trans folks, really against many marginalized groups, including Black people, who weaponize it against other Black people. But I've come to understand Christianity isn't the problem, neither is the church, which I know is controversial. I think the problem is the people bringing the oppressor's tools into a space, which is what has happened in a lot of Black churches. Because I think people spend a lot of time talking about the Black church as like this problematic institution. But I think the problem is, again, bringing the oppressor's tools into the space, replicating the same violence that we've been subjected to in this country under the guise of religion. And when I was talking to my friend, I had mentioned I don't trust people whose entire spiritual religious practice is rooted in their hatred of or feelings of superiority over another. I don't care if you a hoodoo or you practice some other kind of non-Christian. I don't care if it's Christian or non-Christian or Muslim. Like, if we talking about your practice or about God, because I can talk about God and spiritual shit with anybody, and you start giving that energy of it's my way or no way, we're done. I don't trust you. I'm not interested. Like, so yeah, what are your thoughts, Leah?
I would say similar to you. I can't speak for everyone, but for me, spirituality is rooted in my desire to connect with the divine. And like I said on the last episode, that shifts. Like when I was younger, it was the wind and the earth and the trees. And a few years ago, it was constant communion with my ancestors at my ancestral altar. Then it was the water. And now it's like with animals. And for me, I feel like the divine is everywhere. And it's through me like searching that I'm starting to see where I fit in all of it. Like, I will always have community, whether that's with people or with animals or with the elements or with plants. And I also feel like I don't have to prove anything to anybody because I've done a lot of work to separate performance with reality. And I've also peeped how everybody else loves a good performance. And so nowadays, I don't feel like I need to perform my spirituality because it's mine and I get to dictate, what that looks like for me. I will say that it has taken some time to separate my personal hurt from the church and from Christianity. And part of me wonders if like Christianity is different in other countries because in the US, we have our racial hierarchy, capitalism, rugged individualism, anti-blackness. I think all of that warps Christianity into what we see in this country. And so the struggle that I have been having lately is that the Black church has been such a great institution that since many of us have divested from it, we're missing out on a lot of the resources. Like for us growing up, it was a place where we learned Black history and we learned skills like public speaking, literacy. You got music lessons and singing lessons. You performed. It was a free resource that for a lot of Black people, it was also a source of community. And I read about how in the early pandemic, it really made me miss the church because I felt like it was a place where you were encouraged to cry and to shout out and to wail against all the bad things that were happening outside of the church. It was a safe space for us in a lot of ways. And so I think without the church, I have been wondering what else do we have where we can do all of that? The closest I found is like being in queer spaces, but there are a lot of safety issues that come from that. And there are a lot of people who are trying to break those places up. And so without the church, like there is a need to create spaces where we can have all of these resources again. But I feel like this country does not allow Black people to create spaces because white people come in and break it up. So that's been my struggle lately.
I love what you mentioned about the Black church because, like, I want to also add to the fact that there are a lot of Black churches who have, like, lost their way and have become wrapped up in that capitalistic sort of like mindset. Churches used to, like, I remember my church back in the day. I don't know if they still do it because I don't go to church anymore and I'm not in Mississippi, but during the summer they used to give the kids lunch in the neighborhood, free lunch and free breakfast. Vacation Bible school, that was also another way kids got food and got breakfast, and particularly during spring break got breakfast and lunch, because there are a lot of kids who their only meal is at school sometimes. Church used to be a space for activism, and there's still, I'm not saying all churches have like veered away from this, but what I'm saying is, like, the church used to be a spot for so many different things that you talked about: public speaking, literacy, singing. So many musicians and singers, especially from back in the day. I was about to say black in the day. They came out of the church. They came Black opera singers, black R&B, black gospel, they all have that churchy foundation. They developed their singing skill. It wasn't no niggas wasn't paying for vocal lessons. The vocal lessons was your choir director telling you, get on the key. Stop the music. Stop the music real quick because y'all not somebody in here ain't on key. So now everybody individually give me the key. Okay? That was the vocal training and it worked. I wish churches got back to that. I wish this sort of exclusivity around money, because apparently there are churches that will dismiss you if you're not keeping up with your tithe. I think, quite frankly, that's fucking ridiculous. I don't think God told you that people don't deserve community, don't deserve to be in the place of worship if they can't afford to give you the little bit of money that they have left over from bills to buy food, that somehow that needs to go to the church, especially when a lot of y'all aren't pouring that money back into the community. And yeah, spiritual leaders deserve to be taken care of by their flock, but you also supposed to be investing in your community. It ain't all about you shining. And a lot of these, especially big mega churches, honestly, it's nothing but a social club for rich people, for wealthy people, or people trying to put on the persona that they have money. And there are churches that are literally, they're grooming their church and congregation to reflect that. You might go to these churches and see, don't nobody, everybody in the church drive a luxury car. Everybody in the church got a particular type of job. I'm sorry, that doesn't make me trust your church, because if poor people don't have a space in your church, if queer folks, if houseless people don't have a space in your church ain't got nothing to do with God as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, I'm gonna get off my tangent, but I just wanted to say that because that bothers me a lot, and I think that's one of the, like, that's a big problem that has happened with our churches as in black folks, because I don't care what the other folks doing.
I feel like there's not a middle ground when it comes to the churches. I feel like they're not reaching out and extending and trying to like find some middle ground between the young people who want the community, who want the resources, who want to pour into a church, and the church. Like my mama told me, so my mama has not been going to church regularly since the pandemic. At first it was because of the church was like shut down because of the pandemic. And now it's she doesn't agree with a lot of the way things are run. The only young people in the church are children or grandchildren of people. There are not people my age there because the pastor has run them away. It's sad kind of how he has dug in his heels, and instead of adapting or reaching out, he's just been like, no, this is right. And y'all are wrong and you're going to burn in hell. I don't know. That's just really sad to me.
What's been helpful for me is that understanding that no matter your religion, your spiritual practice, we all are after the same thing: a connection to a divine power, a connection to community, and a sense of security in an increasingly distressful, in an increasingly distressing world. And I think we should and we can and should respect the path that folks choose. And, we've used Christianity as an example, but the issue ain't exclusive to Christian folks. But we live in a Christian nation where Christians who love power more than God and humans, use their power to control and at worst attempt to eliminate entire groups of people. So, yeah, I think we just need to respect each other. If even if you don't understand it, it's okay to just mind your business and focus on this is how I connect with God. There are some people, their spiritual practice is entirely connected to being outside. I worship the trees. There are people who literally, the trees are my God. The ocean is my God because God is in all of that.
Mhm.
Just like you can find your God through whatever rituals or practices you do in church.
I think you've said everything. I don't really have anything else to add. Yeah. So if you like this episode, you can like, rate, and review Hoodoo Plant Mamas on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If anything from the show resonated with you, make sure to share with us on social media. You can find us on Twitter at Hoodoo Plants and Instagram at Hoodoo Plant Mamas. Thank y'all for listening and stay tuned for our next episode. Bye.
Bye.